Hello and welcome to Sophy Ridge on Sunday. Children pulled out of the rubble, grieving parents, two countries with their infrastructure devastated. Now, there have been some incredible stories of survival this weekend after the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, but sadly, many more of heartbreak and tragedy. And more than 28,000 people have now died, but the real figure could be double that. So we'll be talking on the show about what the UK is doing to help and whether it's enough. We'll be speaking to the Foreign Office Minister, Andrew Mitchell, on the show today. Following a damning report about the BBC chairman and a loan to Boris Johnson, we'll be talking to Labour's Lisa Nandy. And we'll also be joined by the SNP's John Nicolson, a member of the Culture, Media and Sport Committee who released that report. Also joining us, the Conservative backbencher Sir John Redwood, as the Conservative row over tax cuts intensifies. And after another appalling few weeks of violence against women, we're going to be speaking to the activist Patsy Stevenson. Now, you might remember her face from being pinned to the ground by police at the Sarah Everard protest. Hello, good morning. Lots to get through on the show today, so we can crack straight on with our first interview of the morning. A little earlier, I spoke to the Foreign Office Minister, Andrew Mitchell. I want to talk at length about the earthquake and the deteriorating situation in Turkey and Syria. But just before we get to there, I just wanted to speak about the Parliamentary Committee report into the appointment of BBC Chairman Richard Sharp, because the Culture, Media and Sport Committee, which approved his appointment, say that he made significant errors of judgement by failing to declare his role in facilitating a loan to Boris Johnson, who was then Prime Minister, obviously went on to recommend him for the job of BBC Chair. Do you accept the committee's findings?
Well, we should be grateful to the committee. This is a senior committee of the House of Commons. And although I haven't yet read the report, the headlines are in the public domain. I think this is really now a matter for the BBC. And also, of course, the Commissioner for Public Appointments has made clear that they are going to have a look at it. He has recused himself from the process because I think he knows Richard Sharp. But someone appropriate will have a look at that, and then we will see whether there are other lessons to be learned.
As you say, the headlines in the public domain, Damien Green, the acting chair, he said the fact that Richard Sharp didn't declare his involvement means there are question marks about the process. He says such a significant error of judgment meant we were not in full possession of the facts when we were required to rule on his suitability for the role of BBC chair. I mean, how can people have faith in the process if that's what he's saying?
Well, I think Damien Green is a very senior member of the House of Commons, and what he and his committee says matters. But I think, as I say, this is really something which the Public Appointments Commissioner must look at, and we must wait for his judgment. And above all, of course, it's a matter for the judgment of the BBC.
I mean, some other politicians, Lucy Powell of the Labour Party, John Nicolson of the SNP, they're saying that Mr Sharp's position is untenable.
Well, I think, as I say, we shouldn't rush to judgment on that. We should allow this process to conclude, and then, in the end, it will be a matter for the BBC, of which he's the chairman, to make a final decision. I
mean, I guess it matters, doesn't it, because of people's trust in the appointments process for these big jobs. Is there wider lessons to be learnt here about people who've made large political donations, not just to the Conservative Party, but, you know, it's obviously happened with Labour in the past as well, about whether they should be put forward for these big public appointments?
Well, I don't think donations of themselves are a feature which should ban someone from having such an appointment. But the most important issue is that there should be full and open transparency, and I think that is at the heart of the questions that Damien and his committee have raised.
So the issue is the transparency rather than the donations?
Yes, I think that's right.
And just finally, you know, I remember, you know, this time last year, you made very clear that you lost faith in Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. Do you think that this is partly an example of, you know, Rishi Sunak and the current cabinet having to clear up the mess that was left by the previous man in the job?
Well, I think that's something which people will have different views on.
What's your view?
Well, I think the key thing is that what Rishi and Jeremy Hunt are doing, is they are restoring confidence in the handling by the government of the British economy. And you can see from the markets and from the recent economic news that they are doing a very good job.
I mean, Rishi Sunak also said it was about integrity as well, didn't he? Restoring faith in the integrity of the government.
Yes, and I think the process which we've been discussing does just that.
OK. Now, let's talk about the earthquake, shall we? Everyone will have seen the absolute devastation. I mean, it's one of those stories. For me, it's very difficult to, and I'm sure many of our viewers, it's very difficult just to witness some of the destruction, the loss of life that's been happening there. You know, the official death toll, I think, is 28,000. But, of course, if you speak to people on the ground, it's very clear that that is an underestimation.
I'm afraid that's so. It is bleak beyond belief. It is the worst crisis, the worst earthquake that we've faced, certainly since Nepal, probably since Haiti. One of the heartening things is that lessons have been learned from what happened in Haiti, when the whole thing was a disaster, reinforced by the fact that there was no proper coordination and the international community piled in, and the response was, as a result, was not strong and was not right. This time, because Turkey and the body within Turkey that handles these things, ARAP, is much more sophisticated and is really well organised, the international community has been able to respond. And Britain was one of the first people to contact the Turkish government, ask what we could do, and to respond to the needs that the Turkish government set out. Of course, it's not just southern Turkey, it's also northern Syria, which is ungoverned space. It's much more difficult to get help and relief there. And the response of the British public through the Disasters Emergency Committee appeal is unprecedented. They have raised something like £53 million in 48 hours. The extraordinary generosity of the public is amazing and outstanding and heartening. And I hope that anyone who wants to support the Disasters Emergency Committee appeal will do so. This money will be incredibly well spent through international and respected NGOs, through the United Nations, and it will make a real difference. And the government is supporting it too, through taxpayers' money, through matching the first £5 million as well. So, you know, this is a great effort, but it's really, really needed. Yeah,
as you say, it's astonishing the amount of money that people have taken from their pockets and given to the people who so desperately need it. You say that you are afraid that the death toll will rise. Do you think it could double?
I think that the figure that the UN Emergency Coordinator has given yesterday when he was in the region of 50,000 is the right figure, I fear, that we are going to see.
And, of course, the situation in Turkey, the security situation also seems to be deteriorating. Some aid agencies having to pause their work. What is happening on the ground?
Well, in Turkey, there is good organisation. And Britain sent immediately 77 search and rescue experts with the top-notch equipment to help. They arrived pretty rapidly. They have 4 sniffer dogs with them, and they have a team of emergency medical operatives to assess what else can be done on the ground in conjunction with the Turkish authorities. So as far as Turkey is concerned, we are, I think, doing what is required. 2 flights took off last night to help, one from RAF Brize Norton in Britain, one from our stores in Dubai, taking tents and blankets into Turkey, and much of that, of course, is bound for Syria. It is in Syria that the international community is far more stretched. We were able to get through the one crossing that is open for the UN, but that crossing too was badly damaged in the earthquake, and because of the Russian veto, the UN cannot use the other 3 crossings out of Turkey into Syria. So it is in Syria that the real problems lie. We were able to react fast there because the White Helmets, which were the civil defence group during the war, they are the responders, the first responders in Syria, and they were able to get in there and try and help people out from under the rubble, rescue people, and we supported them immediately with some money, some more money 24 hours later, and that will help them put fuel in their cars, rent and hire equipment, provide for blankets and local stores and help the people there who, as I say, because there's no infrastructure and it's ungoverned space, are in very deep jeopardy. And, of course, the temperature last night was minus 5 degrees in the region.
I mean, you can't imagine, can you, with the infrastructure, as you say, just crumbling and temperatures at that level. You talk about the situation in Syria being much more complicated. Obviously, you know, Assad is a dictator. He's murdered his own people. We obviously don't have a diplomatic relationship with him. Does that make it more difficult?
Well, it doesn't in these circumstances because we negotiate with the Syrian authorities through the United Nations. As I said, Martin Griffiths is on the ground there. He's a Brit. He's the senior British official at the United Nations, and he's in charge of the United Nations relief effort. And having him there as a voice for the international community makes our position with the Syrian government extremely strong.
So the difficulty is because the devastation in the country already because of the years of civil war. I have to note that, you know, the latest figures show that our aid spending in Syria halved. We spent 181 million in 2020 and 91 million in 2021. Was that the right thing to do?
Well, you know, if you look at the amount of money that Britain has spent supporting the victims of the war, the Syrians who've had to move. And actually half of Syria was on the move, both to the 4 countries around Syria, but also internally displaced. And, of course, 1 million of them across into Europe. Now, throughout that time, Britain supported the Syrian displaced people, the Syrian refugees.
But the money's halved, though, hasn't it? We were still supporting them, but the money's gone down significantly.
We did more for those refugees than the whole of the rest of the European Union put together in terms of support and financial support for the rescue efforts. But as far as Syria is concerned, it's not really about money. We have provided the funds that were needed for the White Helmets. Although the budget, as you imply, is under considerable stress, when it comes to humanitarian work, we have some flexibility on that.
My point is that the situation is worse in Syria, not just because of the earthquake, but because of the infrastructure, the hospitals already creaking, the country devastated because of years of war at a time when we have halved the amount of aid we're spending.
Yes, as I said, the budget is under very considerable stress, but we are still spending a great deal of money there, not far short of £200 million. So we're doing what we can, and we are having a big effect on the ground. And it is partly because of the work we do through international NGOs as well as through the United Nations that we know what's happening on the ground there, and we are therefore able to ensure that British help really gets through to those who need it.
I want to talk a little bit about the aid budget as well. I know that you, over your career, have been someone who's been a big proponent about the importance of international aid. Of course, Rishi Sunak cut our aid budget from 0.7% of GDP to 0.5% back in 21. That was supposed to last for 3 years. So will it go back up to 0.7% next year?
Well, it will go back up to 0.7% when the 2 fiscal tests that were set down by Rishi and confirmed by Parliament are met. I can't tell you precisely when that will be because it's not clear how quickly the economy is going to recover. The economy has suffered significantly from Putin's illegal war in Ukraine and also, of course, from the aftermath of COVID. So I can't give you an answer to that. But what I can tell you is that my job is to try and make sure that we have multipliers which augment the money that we can use, and we are doing that as fast as we possibly can. And also that we made our case to the Treasury. One of the problems for the budget is that we meet the cost of the first year of Ukrainian refugees who have sought sanctuary in Britain. That's perfectly proper. It's part of the use of the aid budget as defined. But we made our case to the Treasury, and the Treasury did manage to find an extra £2.5 billion of taxpayers' money. So we're spending at about 0.55 now, but we will get back to 0.7 as soon as the fiscal tests are met and the economic circumstances allow.
You obviously can't tell us when that will be. I just want to have a look at what you said at the time the aid budget was cut. You said this, you said, no one should be any doubt about the damage these huge humanitarian cuts have done to the world's poorest and to the reputation and effectiveness of British leadership. That's what you said in October 2021. What happened to that, Andrew Mitchell?
That Andrew Mitchell is now doing his very best to ensure that we mitigate the huge humanitarian cuts in the way that I described, by finding these multipliers.
Some people might say that you've sold out on your principles to get a government job.
Let me explain why I don't think that's true. So we're using these multipliers to find extra money. An example would be when I was in the Horn of Africa, where we have just staved off a famine this year, last year. We were able to do some co-financing with other countries, which increased the amount of money that was brought to bear on that crisis. So I'm looking at ways of mitigating the humanitarian effects. And in terms of the reputation and effectiveness of British leadership, we are on the case. I'm hoping to make sure that the merger with the Foreign Office of DFID works better, and the Foreign Secretary and I are agreed on a number of measures, which I hope will be announced in the integrated review, which will help address that very point.
I can't help but think, whether it ever crosses your mind that they've given you this job in government because you'll be less trouble for them as a government minister than on the backbenchers. If you were on the backbenchers right now, I kind of think that you'd be on the airwaves saying, look, this is just why we need to restore the aid budget. This is why we need to help the poorest countries in the world. And yes, the economic situation is difficult, but that is exactly why we should be spending more in aid, because, of course, the people who suffer when global inflation is the highest are the very poorest.
Well, in terms of what I would be saying, I am obviously governed by collective responsibility, but collective responsibility is not retrospective. And I'm doing my very best to make the system work. And, if you're a politician, you always have to decide whether or not you are better off on the outside of the tent, trying to do what you can by shouting from the sidelines, or whether it is better to get inside and try and improve the situation. And I'm doing the latter.
There's a lot of focus right now on whether the Ministry of Defence budget should increase, partly, of course, because of the war in Ukraine. In the Sunday Times today, they say the Defence Secretary is demanding an extra £10 billion over the next 2 years. Are you lobbying in a similar way for the aid budget?
Well, as I say, the fiscal tests will need to be met for us to go back to point 7. But by finding other ways of increasing the funding, we are doing everything we can to compensate for that diminution. And you may rest assured I make the case for the development budget on every occasion. As far as the defence budget is concerned, Jeremy Hunt made significant announcements during the autumn statement. We are, I think, one of the only NATO countries spending 2% of our GNI on defence. That is absolutely necessary. The war in Ukraine has shown what a dangerous world we live in. And I think the government has stepped up by producing this extra money. And we are the leading NATO country in Europe. And I think we will see in the integrated review refresh, which is likely to be announced in March, that Britain is absolutely focused both on stopping the Russian aggression and supporting the Ukrainians and making sure that our defence is fit for purpose.
Now, in other news today, the US has shot down an unidentified cylindrical object over Canada. Now, we don't have more details about what that is, but of course it comes off the back of the so-called Chinese spy balloon that was shot down over the US. How concerned should we be about the role of China?
Well, I think we need to get to the bottom of this. Transparency is most important. We need to find out exactly what's been going on, what these objects in the air are doing, what their purpose is, and then we will be able to reach a judgment. I mean, I think it's quite clear that both Canada and the United States have met their obligations to their citizens in intercepting them and destroying them. And once we've seen what was actually involved in the technology, we'll be able to make a judgment about that.
Of course, some of your colleagues on the Conservative benches have some real concerns about China and about the influence. Alicia Cairns, for example, on this programme last week, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, told me that I should delete TikTok from my phone because of Chinese capability. Do you think she's got a point?
Well, I don't know. I'm afraid I'm a bit of an analogue politician in a digital age. But
I think things easier, perhaps.
I think that what Alicia says about China is extremely important. She chairs the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, and many of my colleagues and friends, like Ian Duncan-Smith, the former leader of the party, have been very clear about this. What I would say from the point of view of the Foreign Office and the government is we do have to have a relationship with China. We can't just cut it all off, because otherwise, if we don't talk to them, we won't make any progress at all. And we want to try and make the Chinese government more receptive to and involved in the international system and bring them in. It's a very long-term project, but we can't just cut off all relations with China. But we have to stand up for our values, both here and abroad, against many of the things that China does, of which we do not approve.
We have been sending them aid as well, £50 million in 2021. Should we be doing that?
Well, I was very surprised to see this because in 2010, the first thing I did when the coalition arrived in government was to stop all aid for China. There may be a case occasionally for some joint technical assistance to be deployed, but we shouldn't be giving aid to China, and we're looking to make sure that that aid is better spent.
Oh, really? So you think that actually going forward, that £50 million is not going to happen again?
Well, I think there will have to be a very strong case indeed, and it will have to be an open and public case if we're to spend aid money in China.
Could be better spent in other countries.
Well, that is my starting point, yes.
And then just finally, we're going to be talking to your colleague John Redwood on the programme a little later on. Now, we know, of course, Liz Truss ally, he would like to see tax cuts in the budget next month. Do you think now's the right time to cut taxes?
Well, we'd all like to see tax cuts. We're a tax-cutting party, and I've served with John in the House of Commons on and off since 1987, when we were both first elected. He makes a very strong point about the importance of tax cuts for the economy. But, in the end, if we make tax cuts which are not properly funded, it's borrowing and it's taxation deferred for the next generation. And, many of us are very concerned about intergenerational unfairness in Britain, the position of our children and, indeed, our grandchildren. So I think tax cuts are very important, but they've got to be done at the right time. And I think that the philosophy and argument that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has set out is absolutely right. We will get them when we can, but I think at the moment it's extremely difficult to justify them. I
guess the argument for those on the John Redwood side is that actually tax cuts sort of pay for themselves because they boost growth, they boost investment in the UK. Do you think there's a point there?
Well, there is a bit of that, but I think the much more important point is that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has to take a judgment about when is the right time to do it and when we can afford it. And he set out the arguments very clearly in the autumn statement that now is not the time to do that.
OK, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Andrew Mitchell there. Well, we'll talk to John Redwood a little bit later on the programme. It makes me feel that perhaps there might be a difference of opinion, shall we say, on the merits or otherwise of tax cuts from him. Time now to get Labour's take, though, on some of the big stories around today, whether it is the earthquake in Syria or, of course, that report by the Culture and Media Select Committee into Richard Sharp. We're joined now by Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. Thank you very much for being with us. I just want to start with the report by the DCMS committee. They say that Richard Sharp made significant errors of judgment in failing to declare his involvement in facilitating a loan to Boris Johnson, who, of course, gave him that job a few weeks later. What's your reaction to the report?
It's a really serious development and it makes Richard Sharp's position increasingly untenable. The government has relied on the defence that the DCMS, the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee, approved this appointment, but the Culture, Media and Sport Committee today is saying that actually, had they known about this, it would have been a very different situation. This information was not disclosed to them prior to approving that appointment. Increasingly, the circumstances around the relationship between the Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Richard Sharp is looking more and more murky, and I think his position is becoming increasingly untenable as a result.
You say his position is increasingly untenable. We spoke to Andrew Mitchell earlier, who said that effectively this is a matter for the BBC, although the Public Appointments Commissioner is also looking into it. Is that right?
I think this is something that has far wider reaching implications across society, because the BBC is a national treasure. It's a part of our culture. It is something that is supported by people, lots of people across this country paying money into the licence fee. That's a system that we absolutely support, but it means that rightly and understandably the BBC is held to very high standards. And when you have the BBC being pulled into an increasingly murky situation and ongoing reports of Conservative sleaze and corruption, that's a very serious thing indeed. And I think it's becoming more and more difficult to see how Richard Sharp can continue in that role.
So you're saying he should resign? Is that what you're saying?
Well, there is a report that is due from the BBC. They're reviewing this matter at the moment. I think it's right that we give the BBC time to investigate this and to report on it. But I think today's developments are incredibly serious, and for several weeks now the government has been saying that Parliament had approved this position. Well, Parliament is now saying through the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee that had they known about this relationship, it would have been a very different matter. And when that report is published, I think we need to know whether there is any defence of that the reasons for withholding that information from Parliament and therefore from the public. And if there isn't a defence, I think it's difficult to see how Richard Sharp could possibly continue in the position that he's in, given the far-reaching implications for the reputation of the BBC and the implications for trust in government and trust in journalism.
Now, you have used the word murky, so I do just want to put Richard Sharp's statement across at this point, because he's said that he regrets and apologises for not giving the full information to the committee, but he does say that he believes that he acted in good faith and that he proactively briefed the Cabinet Secretary. The other point that I want to make is that, you know, some people might be listening to this thinking, look, you only got a problem with this if it's Conservative supporters or Conservative donors who are in positions of power at the BBC. You know, whether it's James Purnell, Gavin Davies, Greg Dyke, they all had affiliations with Labour and jobs at the BBC. So is it just the politics that you don't like here?
I don't think there was ever a suggestion that James Purnell or any of the other names that you mentioned facilitated personal loans for the Prime Minister while the appointment process was ongoing and then withheld that information from Parliament at a pre-scrutiny committee session that was designed exactly to unearth these sorts of relationships. I don't accept that accusation at all. I think that the impartiality and integrity of the BBC matters. I'm a strong supporter and always have been of the BBC and the fact that it's publicly funded through the licence fee. I think it's one of the great strengths that Britain has, not least because I just heard your interview with Andrew Mitchell. You were talking about the increasingly unstable situation across the world, increasingly aggressive behaviour by China. The BBC World Service and other news outlets is a light on the hill for people all over the world, precisely because it is paid for and funded by millions of people across this country, and its integrity matters, and that's why this matters so much, not because it's a Conservative appointment, not because it's now mad in allegations of Conservative sleaze, but because it's being pulled into what is a very untenable position around this government, and that's not acceptable.
Andrew Mitchell said that we should look at whether lessons could be learned from this. Do you think in the future it would be helpful if, for example, people who'd made donations to political parties were banned from public appointments such as this?
Well, I mean, there's a huge, much bigger debate around donations to political parties. For my part, I represent a party that is funded by millions of people across this country who put their hands into their pockets every week and pay small sums in order to fund us. I'm very proud to do that. I think it's the cleanest money in British politics. I actually think the answer to this is not about the funding of political parties. I think the answer to this is that those of us in public life have to behave with integrity and decency, and if we don't, not only ought there to be robust standards that are upheld and we ought not to be able to continue in public life, but also that we ought to face the electorate at the ballot box so that they can make a judgment. We've had 4 years now of this Conservative government mired in accusations, ongoing accusations of cronyism and sleaze, some of which have been proven. And I can't wait for the general election because I think that this is really degrading every part of our political system, our journalism, trust in our institutions, and I think profoundly this needs to change.
OK, just wanted to point out again from Richard Sharp's statement, he says that he didn't facilitate an introduction between Boris Johnson and Mr Blythe, and he wasn't involved in the arrangement of the loan. I'm really keen to talk as well about the other story that we've been covering a lot on Sky News, which is the devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria. I mean, honestly, it's just mind-boggling, isn't it, what we are seeing unfolding before our eyes. Now, we know that Syria in particular, of course, has been particularly badly hit because of the devastation that that country was already facing. UK aid to Syria halved between 2020 and 2021. If Labour wins the next election, will you immediately restore the UK aid budget to 0.7% of GDP?
We can't make commitments to immediately start funding our priorities in government. The reason that we can't do that is because we're likely to inherit the worst economic situation since the Second World War because of a decade of Tory mismanagement of the economy. I'm standing here today in Nottingham where local government leaders are gathering from across the country. That's one of the messages that I'll be giving to them today, and actually they know it because right across the country we've seen cut after cut after cut, a consequence of the fact that we've got low or no growth in this country. Our priority is going to be to get the economy growing by transferring power out of Westminster and Whitehall to local leaders and business leaders in our community so that they can start making our economy work again. And as soon as is practically possible, we will restore the 0.7% commitment. We believe that that is absolutely essential, not just to helping with the appalling situation in Syria and in Turkey that we're seeing unfolding on our screens, but also to safeguarding Britain's interests. It's not in Britain's interest to retreat from the world. We used to lead the world. Over the last 10 years, we've started to leave it. That will reverse under a Labour government, but when we make promises, your viewers should know that we will be sure that we can keep them.
So you want to restore the path to 0.7% as soon as possible. I mean, it's basically the same position as the Conservatives then, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I don't think, frankly, that the Conservatives have any intention of doing so. Boris Johnson abolished the
They've said that they will. They've said that they will restore it when fiscal circumstances allow, which is exactly the same position as Labour.
Well, and credit to Andrew Mitchell, who was just on your programme, because it was thanks in part to the noise that was created by him and other Conservative backbenchers, as well as the Labour Party, that the government felt compelled to make that commitment. But they had to be dragged kicking and screaming to do it. The difference between us and them is that we believe that by going out and playing a leading role in the world, in looking to the world beyond our shores, we help to safeguard Britain's interests. It's why we've said to the government that they've been far too complacent about the rise of China. They've been far too unfocused about growing Russian aggression on our doorstep. And it's why just a moment ago you had Andrew Mitchell, a minister in government, saying that the government is now having to revise their 10-year strategy for how we relate to the rest of the world only a year after they published it. I'm glad that they're doing it, but every single time this government has to be dragged kicking and screaming to recognise that what happens beyond our shores matters deeply to the interests of the British people. Our record in government shows otherwise, and when we're in government again, we will help to safeguard Britain's interests by reaching out to the world and leading, not leaving.
Just finally, you are talking about transferring power away from Westminster to local communities this weekend. I guess my real question is, if you've had dealings with your local council, as I'm sure lots of people watching this programme will have, why on earth would you think that local authorities are any better at dealing with these issues than Westminster?
Well, because if you look at the example from across the country, whether it's in Telford, where the Labour Council has gone out and secured millions of pounds worth of investment to create jobs and to skill up their young people to be able to get those jobs, whether it's Tracy Brabin, the Mayor of West Yorkshire, who has recently secured 1,000 jobs for Bradford by flying across the world and explaining the benefits of investing in her region. These are leaders who know their communities well, who are better placed to be able to drive economic growth and build thriving local economies. And instead what we've got is the absurd situation where they're going cap in hand to Westminster and Whitehall asking for small powers and resources in order to do the things they know that works. Today we've released a dossier that shows that this government is micromanaging to such an extent that they're even telling local authorities when and how to remove chewing gum from park benches. We think this country can do far better than that, and that's why we say that we're going to get the economy growing in every part of Britain so that young people in every community know that they can have the choices and chances that they deserve.
Thank you very much indeed, Lisa Nandy there. Well, Labour's Lisa Nandy, they're pretty strong, I thought, on the appointment of Richard Sharp, saying that his position, in her view, is untenable. Of course, I gave you his reaction to that as well, his response. And also saying that both Labour and the Conservatives, as we've learned on the programme, unable to commit immediately to restoring that aid budget target of 0.7% of GDP, despite the devastation that we've seen in Turkey and Syria. Still to come on the programme this morning, we are going to be hearing a little bit more from the SNP's John Nicolson. He, of course, is on that committee that looked into the appointment of the BBC chairman. We'll also be speaking to John Redwood. It'll be interesting to hear. A Conservative backbencher, he's got some interesting views on tax cuts and what the Chancellor should be doing in the budget next month. Plus, we'll get some immediate reaction from our political correspondent, Liz Bates, who's watching all of our interviews. She's not on the screen today because she's going to be in the studio, which is good news for us. So we're going to be talking to Liz on the programme In The Take. That's at 9:30. Well, let's get more now on the loan that keeps attracting interest. Our show producer, Steve, very happy with that particular bit of scripting there. Now, the chairman of the BBC, Richard Sharp, as we've been discussing, is under renewed pressure over claims he was involved in helping to facilitate a loan for Boris Johnson before being made the chair of the corporation. And the Commons Digital, Culture, Media and Sport Committee says he made significant errors of judgement when failing to declare his role, and he should reflect on the potential damage caused to trust in the BBC. Well, I've been speaking to the SNP's John Nicolson, who's on the committee. Just talk us through the findings of this report.
Well, you've read the report. The report is, I think, pretty brutal. What we found is that Richard Sharp, the BBC chair, has broken the rules. The rules quite clearly say that if you apply for a public service job like this, you've got to be completely open about any conflict of interest. Now, Mr Sharp facilitated an enormous £800,000 loan to Boris Johnson, the then Prime Minister. And it was Boris Johnson who appointed Richard Sharp as BBC chair. So clearly that's a conflict of interest. He didn't tell his interview panel, and he didn't tell us as MPs who were then asked to consider his appointment. And when he appeared before us last week, he didn't seem to think that he'd done anything wrong, which I found perplexing, because clearly he broke the rules. We knew he was a big Tory party donor. We knew he'd given £400,000 to the Tories.
That's not against the rules.
Which is, I was going to say, that's not against the rules, and we knew about that. I think it's wrong. I don't think you should be giving huge amounts of money and then getting a plum job from the people you've given money to. I think that's wrong. But as you say, it's not against the rules. But we didn't know anything about this huge loan to Boris Johnson.
I want to just come in now with Mr Sharp's statement, because I think it's important, of course, to put his point of view across as well. He said that he did brief the Cabinet Secretary about the appointment and that he was never involved in the arrangement of a loan between Mr Blythe and Mr Johnson. So let's just have a look at his statement now. He says, Mr Sharp appreciates that there was information that the committee felt that it should have been made aware of in his pre-appointment hearing, your point. He regrets this and apologises. And then he goes on to say it was in seeking at the time to ensure that the rules were followed and in the belief that this had been achieved, that Mr Sharp acted in good faith in the way he did. That's the defence.
Well, that's a load of old flannel, isn't it? I mean, that doesn't really mean anything at all. He appreciates that the committee's upset. Why is he not sorry? He had a long session with us where he could have said, he could have put his hands up, he could have showed a bit of humility.
I mean, he does apologise, to be fair. He says he regrets this and apologises.
He could have apologised when he was in front of the committee. He's apologising now because he sees how brutal the report is and he's fighting for his job. But I think one of the problems as well was just his general approach to the committee when he appeared before MPs, cross-party committee. He was just so haughty and entitled. And if I'd been him and I'd realised that I'd done something as badly wrong as he had done, I think I'd have apologised on the spot and said I'd made a mistake. And he didn't do that. He sat before us for the whole hearing and failed to apologise at any point.
Now, I just want to say, obviously your committee has a really important role in accepting the appointment of the chair. And at the time, you say you didn't know all the facts. I just want to have a look at what your committee acting chair, Damien Green, had to say. Conservative Damien Green. He said, such a significant error of judgement meant that we were not in the full possession of the facts when we were required to rule on his suitability for the role of BBC chair. If you knew then what you know now, do you think the appointment would have gone through?
I can't speak for other members of the committee because we didn't know what we know then, what we know now. But it's absolutely clear that when he filled out the application form, in fact, I read out the application form rules to him, that he had to sign to say that there was nothing in his past that could potentially cause embarrassment either to him or to the BBC. Clearly, the BBC is enormously embarrassed by this. And BBC staff, I know because they're writing to me in huge numbers, BBC staff are very upset about this. They're upset about the way that he's behaved as chair, because he imposed himself on a board to choose the head of BBC News and Current Affairs. He's not a journalist. He shouldn't be doing that. So they're worried about political interference. And I think for BBC staff now, they've lost confidence in him. So it's difficult to see how he can carry on.
How many have written to you then, roughly?
Scores
of BBC staff written to you. And would you have come to a different conclusion? I know you can't talk about members of the committee, but would you have come to a different conclusion yourself?
Well, my view always is that people who've given huge donations to political parties should not be appointed to public service roles. That is my ongoing view. And I think Keir Starmer, now, if he wants to clean up politics, when he becomes Prime Minister, if he becomes Prime Minister, I think he should now say that anybody who's given a large donation to Labour or any other political party should not get a public service role, and that he will not give big public service jobs to donors to the Labour Party.
Because this is key, isn't it? Because a lot of people will be looking at this and say, look, you guys only kick up a fuss when it's a Conservative supporter who gets a job.
Well, I think they say that to the Labour Party. They don't say that to my party.
If you look at, James Pennell, Gavin Davis, Greg Dyke, they all had affiliations to Labour. They all went into top jobs in the BBC. Some people might think, well, maybe this is a bit of a rebalancing.
Well, I don't think that. I think it's wrong for any party to receive large amounts of money and for the party that receives the money then to appoint the person concerned to a top job. As I said to Mr Sharp, it's all a bit Banana Republic.
Banana Republic, you think? That really is a strong statement there. And of course it matters because the BBC's reputation hinges on impartiality. Millions of people trust it, use its news services. Do you believe the BBC is impartial?
I think the BBC aims to be impartial. There's always going to be questions over individual presenters or reporters, but the BBC prides itself on its impartiality. I'm a former BBC presenter and news presenter. As you know, I was on Newsnight and other programmes, presented BBC Breakfast. And certainly when I was a presenter, nobody ever tried to tell me what to do, what to say, or what to ask. That's my personal experience.
I guess Mr Sharp would say that, look, with these big public appointments, you attract people who believe in public service. And that's why you get people who have made donations or are affiliated to parties.
Right. So Mr Sharp has shown no interest in broadcasting throughout his career, barring one application that he told us about. He previously applied for a job on the board of the BBC. He wasn't even interviewed. To paraphrase Mrs Merton, what was it about this application following the £800,000 facility that first attracted Boris Johnson to him as BBC chair?
Is his position untenable?
I don't see how he can carry on. How can he argue the BBC's case? How can he talk about impartiality, given that he withheld this important information from us and given the low levels of trust that he now enjoys amongst BBC staff?
OK, thank you very much indeed for your time on the programme. Well, there we go. John Nicolson with some pretty punchy words, shall we say, in the wake of that committee report into the appointment of the BBC chair. Now, Liz Truss's spirited return to the political spotlight has reinvigorated the debate over tax cuts. The former PM's defence of her time in office has also prompted some of her allies to double down on their calls for Rishi Sunak and the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, to slash taxes in order to promote growth. We're joined now by the Conservative backbencher, Sir John Redwood. Lovely to have you on the programme. Thank you for coming on this morning. Now, you're a member of the Conservative Growth Group, and we hear you're developing some policy proposals to take to the Treasury in the coming weeks. What do you want to see?
Well, we want to see sensible targeted tax cuts that will boost self-employment, boost investment, help solve the problem of recruiting and retaining doctors and other skilled staff, and will add to the idea of growth. We're very pleased that the Prime Minister and the new Chancellor have now got growth as one of their big 5 aims. And indeed, out of the 5 aims, 3 of the aims are economic, and they're all really related to growth. That is exactly the right thing to do. But we're urging them to do rather more and not to rule out tax rate cuts, because we think they're going to be crucial, particularly to boost investment. Otherwise, we're going to have a very poor year for investment, which will lead to a very disappointing outturn on growth. We've just seen what the threat of high taxes is doing, with AstraZeneca transferring a very important investment to Ireland.
What specific tax cuts would you like to see then?
Well, there are quite a lot of targeted ones. I think, first of all, the self-employed are getting a very bad deal. I think we should reverse the 2017 and 2021 changes to so-called IR35. We want to promote more self-employment, make it easier for people to get into self-employment. That is the quickest way to expand capacity. Then I think we need to look at business taxes. I don't think the corporation tax rate increase will raise the money the Treasury and the OBR think it will. All the evidence is in the past, when Conservative governments have had the courage to cut the corporation tax rate, never a popular move, it raises more money. It's the way to tax business more. And we've just seen from AstraZeneca what a big impact going the other way can have on very crucial developments in the life sciences area in this case, which is one of the government's targets for improvement. I also think we need to cut taxes where the tax itself is causing strain on people's budgets or companies' budgets, and it's creating a tax subsidy circle, merry-go-round, which is very damaging on the public accounts and on the economy. And why do we still impose VAT on domestic fuel when domestic fuel is too expensive, and then give people bigger subsidies, cut out the middleman and woman, and take the tax down? Why do we charge heavy energy using businesses the highest carbon taxes of anywhere in the major economies of the world, and then get forced into having to pay them subsidies because they're losing so much money? So we need to remove some of those taxes on energy at a time of an energy crunch with very high energy prices.
You speak about the tax cuts that we want to see, and I'm just trying to work out who we is. How many of your colleagues agree with you on this?
Well, the growth group is gathering strength as we speak. I think I'm not a whip. I haven't whipped the growth group, but there are dozens of Conservative MPs who take the view that the growth strategy the government has headlined needs some more positive measures behind it. And I think you'll find probably a majority of the Conservative backbench would agree with what I'm saying today, that they want targeted tax cuts, and then there will be a range of views on which are the best targeted tax cuts to choose. But I think the majority definitely believes that you don't get growth without more realistic tax levels. And I think many are very worried that Britain is in danger of becoming uncompetitive because of the higher taxes the government is wishing to impose. And we've had a good record in past years for making ourselves a bit more tax competitive. And if you want to see what lower taxes does and how it transforms an economy and increases the revenues, just look across the Irish Sea at the Republic of Ireland.
At the same time,
though, more as a proportion out of business because they got the lowest corporation tax of the advanced world.
You say if you want to see what low taxes does, you should look at Ireland. But some would say if you want to look what unfunded tax cuts do, you can look at the last mini-budget by Liz Truss, where, the economy was really wounded by it. The Bank of England even had to step in with emergency measures to stop a run on pensions. I mean, you can't surely be proposing to do the same thing just a few months later.
Well, of course not. I don't want to repeat the mistakes that the Bank of England and the Treasury made over that period. But of course...
Wait, sorry, I'm just going to jump in. I just want to jump in because you say there specifically the mistakes that the Bank of England and the Treasury made. So you think it was the Bank of England and the Treasury who made the mistakes, not the unfunded tax cuts themselves?
Well, it's a very odd idea, this unfunded tax cuts, at the same time as that tax change, which I think would have produced more revenue than the OBR and Treasury forecasts, had we seen them, would have suggested. We had double the amount in extra spending. So why don't you blame the unfunded spending increases if you think it was the deficit that did it? But if you actually look at what happened in the markets, the bond market that worried everybody was falling well before the mini budget statement. For the simple reason that the Bank of England was talking it down. The bank said these bonds are far too high. We're going to sell a load of bonds to get the prices of the bonds down. We want the long-term interest rates to rise. So the Bank of England, for policy reasons, decided to sell off the bond market. And then it got out of hand because the Bank of England clearly didn't understand the precarious position of many pension funds, including its own pension fund, which was buying far more gilts than it could afford to pay for. And then, of course, it rightly stepped in and showed that it could turn the market on a sixpence when it needed to.
At the same time, though, it's the markets who reacted, wasn't it? I mean, they are pretty emotionless things, the markets. They just look at what's in front of them.
Well, the markets on the Monday and Tuesday, when we had the serious sell-off in Britain that wasn't matched in America, the previous week America had to sell off for the same reasons as well, it was all about the LDI funds. And it wasn't about Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget on the Monday and Tuesday. It was people saying there is no point in buying bonds or even holding bonds because everybody's a seller, because all these funds needed to sell bonds to raise cash to meet all the margin calls that were coming in because the bonds had fallen in price. And where you had a lot of pension funds that owned 4, 5, 6 times the amount of bond that they'd actually paid for, they faced very big bills when the price fell.
So I'm really interested to talk to you because obviously it comes after the Liz Truss piece in the Sunday Telegraph where she blamed the powerful economic establishment for what happened. You obviously was a key backer of Liz Truss. Do you speak to her much? What do you think her take is on the current direction of the Conservative Party?
Well, I mean, I've obviously read her essay in the Telegraph and I've had a chat to her since then. She does rightly identify the LDI problems on the Monday and Tuesday as being the main difficulty that we face with the long-term interest rates. She hasn't gone quite as far as I've just gone, because she could have pointed out that the Bank of England on the Wednesday showed that not only had it created the problem, but it knew how to solve the problem. Very glad it did solve the problem. I agreed with their action. I think they could have done it just by words. They probably didn't have to buy the extra bonds, but buying the extra bonds made sure that they could get the market up again, and I'm pleased they've now told us they've sold those bonds at a profit. So no damage was done. The interest rates went back up. The bond prices went back up, and the interest rates went back down a bit when the bank wanted them to, and that was good.
The question was also about trying to be a little bit forward-looking as well. I'm just interested to know what do you think Liz Truss's take is on the future direction or the current direction of the party?
Well, I suggest you interview Liz Truss. I thought you wanted to know my views on the economy. And I'm trying to make some serious points about how you get growth. And in order to get growth, you need to understand that if you cut certain tax rates, often the ones that are unpopular with the left, you get much more revenue. The way to tax the rich more is to set tax rates that will make them stay and pay. The way to tax companies more is to have competitive tax rates so more companies stay here, invest here, or come here. And as we saw when Thatcher Lawson, for example, cut top rates of tax, the rich paid an awful lot more and more rich people came. When Osborne cut corporation tax over a period of years, the revenues went up, they didn't fall. So my main message to the Chancellor is if you want growth, you have to have lower rates, but it doesn't mean you're shortchanging the accounts. It means you're finding the smart way to tax the rich and to tax companies rather more. And it is the rich and the companies, of course, have got the money, but they don't necessarily have to pay tax here.
The polling is pretty dreadful, frankly, for your party right now. One poll out this week suggested if there was an election now, you'd been second place behind the SNP. And of course, I know we have to take these things with a large pinch of salt. But are you concerned that if your party doesn't change direction, there'll be a wipeout?
Well, of course, I'm concerned about the current polling, and it tells you something about the public mood. But I think the public is still with me in being impatient to get on with the good news. And I think the Prime Minister has identified the right 3 main priorities, the waiting lists, the illegal immigration and the economy. And of the 3 things he said about the economy, the borrowing will come down if we grow more as a percentage of GDP. And inflation is going to come down because there's a very tough fiscal and monetary squeeze on, thanks to recent bank and treasury action. So it's all about growth. And that's why I repeat that you've got to have a growth strategy. Indeed, that would reinforce the counter-inflation strategy. Why do we have inflation? We don't have enough capacity in this country. Why is energy so dear? Well, we're not producing enough of our own is part of the reason. There are lots of projects out there that could get us more oil and gas from the North Sea. Get on with them, government, and set taxes that mean that people will want to invest there. We obviously need a lot more capacity in electricity production and routing electricity around the country. Again, this has to be balanced investment where people can make money. Get on with it and you will find lower taxes will help you do that.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Always keen to hear your own views on this, so good to have you on the programme. Now, we can turn now to a different issue that I've been keen to talk about on the programme, and it's about violence against women and girls. In just the last few weeks, we've seen the serial rapist and former Met Police officer David Carrick jailed for dozens of crimes spanning decades. In Edinburgh, a man was jailed for killing Benelin Burke and her 2-year-old daughter, Jellica. And police believe that the head of Epsom College, Emma Patterson, was shot dead along with her daughter, Letty, by her husband. Now, behind these high-profile stats lie statistics compiled by Refuge showing that 2 women are killed by a current or former partner every week, and police receive a domestic abuse call every 30 seconds. Now, we're joined by the women's rights activist Patsy Stevenson. Thank you very much for being on the programme. I'm really glad to have you in this morning. I feel like your face is very familiar to me because I really remember those images of you at the Sarah Everard protest. I think we can see, pinned to the ground by police. And it was during COVID times, that's why we've got the face mask on. I mean, I don't want to go over, what happened there, but just talk about why you went on that protest and whether you think anything's changed since then.
Well, I mean, number one, it was a vigil. And
That's true, I shouldn't say
yeah, no, but
vigil.
I mean, people do, and before that, I was never an activist. I was never a protester, nothing like that. I'd never really been to a protest. And now I go to protests all the time. I'm in and out of Parliament. I'm trying to get rid of bills that are affecting us. I'm constantly in this world now, and it's strange. That was 2 years ago. And since then, we've not seen any change. And it's a massive problem where we've got people at the top and people in the Met Police especially, where things happen and then when the news dies down, then they're empty promises and nothing happens. So, I don't know what it's going to take for actual change to happen, but sooner rather than later, we're losing people. This is a real epidemic,
Epidemic is the word, isn't it? It really is. Part of the reason I wanted to get you on is because I've just been reading more and more about the awful murder of Emma Patterson and her daughter, 7-year-old, Epsom College head teacher, killed alongside her daughter. Her husband, George, also found dead, but of course the police believe that he shot them and then killed himself. And, I just feel like there's been a lot of talk about a tragedy, about the murder-suicide, but it's a murder, isn't it, that we're talking about here?
Yeah, and again, the problem is, we've got a lot of people reporting on it who not only do people often speculate, which is really damaging of its own, but the headlines, you can find the onus is always put on women. And it's ridiculous. And the thing is that when you post about this stuff, I posted about it on Twitter, and people are like, I don't see the misogyny. If you don't see the misogyny in this reporting, you might have internalised misogyny yourself.
One headline, did living in the shadow of his high-achieving wife lead to unthinkable tragedy?
I mean, yeah, again, there is no excuse to murder someone. And it's again, fear-mongering young women into believing that not only do they have all of these other things to worry about men killing them for, if you achieve too much, you may be murdered by your own partner. That's ridiculous.
Now, Surrey Police originally described it as an isolated incident. Now, of course, I know why they use those words. It's to reassure people that there isn't a killer at large. But it's not an isolated incident, is it? Women are killed by their partners all the time.
Yeah, and That's the problem. I know a lot of women's rights activists, a lot of people that are speaking up about this stuff, a lot of journalists like yourself that are talking about this and trying to bring it to the public attention and say, listen, we have a real issue here where women are not being taken seriously. This is a real problem that is happening every single day. Like you said, every 30 seconds they're getting a call, you know, and it's too much. It's so, I mean, one is too much, but this is ridiculous. What kind of world are our young girls coming into, you know? And I just wish that men would think, hang on, this is really happening. Believe women and just listen to the women in your life who are telling you this is really happening and try and figure out how you can help this, you know?
You, of course, we know about you because of what happened and the way that you were dealt with by the police at, as you say, a peaceful vigil, it's important to say. We've seen recently, of course, David Carrick of the Met Police jailed for life over 85 offences, including rapes and sexual assaults. How concerned are you about the state of the Met Police?
I mean, I was concerned like 2 years ago. And in saying this about the police, the police system in general needs a complete overhaul, because it's systemic, it's really rife. Hiring women in the police force isn't going to do it. There were women officers at the vigil. They're no better than the men. It doesn't make you, you know, a better police officer. It's not going to make you not sexist. You can have internalised misogyny. And yeah, so, I mean, from what I've seen of the police, these are just the things that are being reported on. We've got over 1,000 police officers being investigated at the moment. You know, Mark Rowley said that's 2 or 3 a week at the moment. And these people, their job is to protect and serve, and they're actively abusing the public. When does it change?
Do you think that it's changing with the new Commissioner, Mark Rowley? He does seem to be doing quite a lot on this. You know, he's giving evidence, he's talking about it, he's saying that there's going to be prosecutions.
The one thing I will say about Mark Rowley is I think a lot of people, and I'm not talking for everyone because I know people say that this isn't true for them, but I appreciate the fact that he's admitting and holding themselves accountable. However, I don't think he is as serious about it as he should be, because we need change right now. And I think the change that he's saying will happen is not good enough, in my opinion.
You're talking a bit about your own experience with the police. What was it like, you know, that night?
I mean, I can't talk much about it because I'm possibly taking them to court. But it's, you know, for me, I thought you could never be arrested unless you do something wrong. And that is not the case. That is not the case. And police are known to go to certain communities and areas where, you know, if they arrest people for no reason, and it sounds far-fetched. It's like, why would you arrest someone for no reason? It happens. This is a truth. And they go to these areas because they can't take legal action against the police. To qualify for legal aid, you need to be earning nothing. I didn't qualify for legal aid and I was a student, earning nothing. So it's, you know, there's not enough help out there for people who are unlawfully arrested. And I think the police get away with a lot of things because they're so close to the justice system.
But you're now considering legal action then. Is there anything you can tell us about that? Or? Yeah,
I mean, so I started legal proceedings last year, I think it was. I'm trying to raise £230,000 by March. I'm at 17 grand. It's probably not going to happen. I'm hoping, you know, that we can raise the money just to take them to court or just to pursue legal action. You know, I mean, if Mark Rowley or the police, if they're doing what they say they are, I mean, I'm waiting for a response, you know. So and it's not just for me; it's for every woman that attended that vigil. I saw what happened; they saw what happened, and the reporting on it. You know, there were a lot of people that were reporting on it, and a lot of people did show what really happened. But the police got out first and said their side of the story, and I can tell you now, a lot of that wasn't true.
OK, thank you very much for being on the programme today. It's been great to have you. I've been really looking forward to speaking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Quick reminder before we go. I mean, we've had all sorts of things covered on the show this morning. We do have our weekly podcast as well. If you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can find the Sophy Ridge on Sunday podcast and subscribe so it's in your feed every week. So we've got highlights of all the interviews today, a bit of post-match analysis as well and some insights. So do check out that podcast. Lots of really important interviews this morning about subjects from, the earthquake to women's rights. So a busy programme for us. But that is it for this week's Sophy Ridge on Sunday. In a minute, after the break, we're going to have Liz Bates in the studio, our political correspondent, running through what we just learned. Thanks for joining us.